Sure, no problem.
Good afternoon. I'm Jane Harmon, the President and CEO of the Wilson Center. I want to welcome a number of the directors of our programs who are sitting in the front row and some dear friends here, and also good friends, ambassadors on this panel, and our moderator who directs our Canada program. This panel does what the Wilson Center does best: offer global context on key policy questions. If you were here for U.S. Trade Representative Mike Froman's remarks last fall, you know that we've covered the American perspective on TPP at the highest levels. Now we're offering views from every edge of the Pacific. My sincere thanks to the public servants joining us today. Peru's ambassador to the United States, Miguel Castilla, the Wilson Center's good friend and Canada's ambassador for a little bit longer, Gary Doer, Vietnam's ambassador Vinh, and Kanji Yamanouchi, Minister of Economic Affairs at the Embassy of Japan. The Wilson Center's own Laura Dawson, director of our Canada Institute, will moderate today's conversation. It's one that matters to all of us at the center and to me personally. I have the scars to prove that I was a pro-trade Democrat during most of my 9 terms in Congress. Not an easy position to take in my party. In the United States, trade is an issue that gets bogged down in partisan politics. Like a number of other issues these days. But we owe the subject, a subject this important, some serious, objective analysis. Because by any measure, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is this century's most significant trade deal. In 30 chapters and more than 5,000 pages, it lays down new rules of the road for a dozen countries and 40%, let me repeat that, 40% of the world economy. You need a wide-angle lens to understand just what an impact that's going to have, from Latin America to East Asia, on issues from workers' rights and the environment to the digital economy. We offer that lens in a series of essays we released this week, which I hope you'll take a look at. Let me just hold up the cover page. This is Wilson Swag, Trans-Pacific Partnership. You can get it online, and I think we may have the print edition outside, but we certainly have this postcard to help you get it online. And while I'm at it, we have another one of these. These are new from the Wilson Center. We have one on implications of the Paris attacks, and that's also available online. What we hope to offer today is perspective. So please join me in welcoming this exceptional panel and our moderator, Laura Dawson, to the Wilson Center.
Thank you, Jane, and good afternoon. Everything okay with the mic? You can hear me okay? Hello, back row? Good. Not only do we have a full house and I believe an overflow room, we also are live casting or webcasting or simulcasting this out to all the world, especially to my friends in cold and snowy Canada. We also are trying out some new technology. We have the Twitter sphere operating, so if you want to tweet some questions to us, we are #TPP, and we are the Wilson Center. So I'll be watching, and hopefully some of your input from this Twitter sphere will be relayed to our impressive panel today. This is an interesting event to be hosting in Washington. Why? Because there's no Americans on the stage.
Wow.
And so I think this really epitomizes what the Wilson Center does and the Wilson International Center does. And that's that it grapples with new challenges, new international issues to figure out what works, what's next, how we can all work together on new programs, new solutions, new policies. The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is really the poster child for a challenging international issue. We've had terrific U.S. leadership on this agreement. We have had terrific participation from the 12 negotiating countries. I've been doing trade policy for almost 20 years now. That's how old I am. And none of these agreements are ever beautifully formed or attractive at their birth. We are witnessing the birth of a new agreement, and I have to tell you, it's kind of an ugly child. There are some challenges with it. There's some new things that we know need to be in trade agreements that we've never seen before, and so we've got some elements introduced into this agreement in currency control, state-owned enterprises that we've never seen before. We've got some old things that we're challenged by, agriculture sensitivities, rules of origin, automotive issues. We have things that, we have new trading partners being brought into a mega regional trade agreement that we that have never been brought into the tent before. And we have new methods of cooperation through this agreement. And so I'm delighted to be joined here by representatives from some of the key negotiating parties in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It was not an easy negotiation. Someone once said the best negotiation is when nobody leaves completely satisfied. I don't think anybody left completely satisfied, but I think that a really strong agreement with great potential emerged. And so now I'm going to ask my friends and colleagues here to talk about the agreement a little bit. I'll start with my Canadian friend, Ambassador Gary Doer, and we'll move through right to left. I'll be asking some questions about the agreement and your perceptions of the agreement in your domestic context, and we'll have an interesting conversation. So my first question, how is the conclusion of the Trans-Pacific Partnership being received in your country? And what are the main benefits and challenges to your country's businesses and consumers? Ambassador Doer.
Well, that's a very specific question. And first of all, I want to point out to my American friends that when it snows in Canada, as Laura talked about, we send it back through hydro and sell it back to the Americans at 7 cents a kilowatt hour in terms of hydroelectric power. So this is part of our trading relationship with our friends south of us. Canada, as you know, in 2011 at the APEC meeting, along with Mexico, expressed our interest to join the TPP negotiations, and that was closely followed by our friends in Japan. And we did so after we saw the framework agreement that was tabled in Hawaii. It was our desire to go to the table without any preconditions. A lot of media comments about we'd have to give up this or that before we even got to the table. That certainly was not the case. We went, in this town, we went forward with the stakeholders, and I think we had about 94% of the stakeholders commenting to Congress that they thought it was a good move forward for the TPP negotiations to include Canada. We then got to the table later that spring, 2012, and we, of course, have been at the table until the tentative agreement that was reached in Atlanta some weeks ago. Full disclosure, the ambassadors that are represented here at the table got together from time to time, sometimes with the United States, sometimes without them, sometimes with the White House, sometimes without them. So I just want to be honest about that. I don't want it to come out in a wiki leak sometime later. We did meet and had breakfast meetings to keep our lines of communication open, not our bargaining positions, but just to ensure that we were operating on the basis of most of the same facts as we were proceeding. Now in Canada, we had a government that was negotiating this agreement that was in the middle of an election campaign. And so they believed and had legal opinion that Canada should not have an empty chair in Hawaii and it should not have an empty chair in Atlanta. And so everything we did during the election was going to be subject to what the people determined in the election campaign and the mandate that ultimately would be provided or not provided by Parliament. And so there was a change in government, as everyone in the room knows, And the government-to-be, when they were in opposition during the election, said that they were in favor of free trade in general, but the specifics of TPP would have to be debated and discussed with the public of Canada, with the provinces, the stakeholders, and Parliament. Not in any order. I don't want to be politically incorrect or diplomatically wrong about the order, but that's certainly been their view, and they've maintained that view since they've been sworn in as new cabinet ministers. So the TPP negotiations and the tentative agreement will proceed accordingly. Just to put it in context, there's also the European trade agreement that we reached with 28 countries. They're still working on the legal text in all 28, or not 28 languages, but all the languages that are part of that. And that also is a trade agreement that must be ultimately sanctioned by the new government and Parliament. I say that because I was involved in the European trade agreement as Premier, where we were asked to provide subnational procurement as provinces to the European countries. And I think Jean Charest and I went to Brussels, Premier Charest and I went to Brussels to commit that from the Premier's group that was meeting on that time. So I'm going to be very antiseptic in my comments. I usually have strong opinions, as you know, but I do respect the fact that a new government should be comfortable with all the elements of the agreement, all the detail of the agreement, all the public benefits, and any trade agreement has pain and gain for every country, as Laura has indicated, and it will proceed accordingly, and the people of Canada will be consulted, and Parliament will decide. And of course, we would point out that in the United States, we've already heard the animated discussions down the street about when and if and how it will be ratified. I sometimes, when I'm traveling in the United States, hear about the various parts of the debate. Even when you go to Jane's former state of California, Jane Harman's, Miss Harman, President Harman, CEO Harman, you hear even in that state, you hear about the conflict on intellectual property between the creators of culture and entertainment and the carriers in the northern part of the state in Silicon Valley that believe in a totally different policy and trade agreement on intellectual property. And some of those debates will take place, I dare say, in every country as part of the pros and cons that will be discussed. So that is my antiseptic comment. Laura, I apologize, but
You don't have to apologize, because I am under no such obligation.
I was just joking. I said, no, I don't.
I was in Alberta last week, and the folks that I was speaking to were very excited about this agreement. I was speaking to people in the oilseed sector, canola, pork, lumber. They are very excited about this agreement, and they are looking to the U.S. for leadership. They are looking to the U.S. to do what it takes to get this agreement passed in Congress so that we can all do a little better in the near future. Without me editorializing, I would now like to ask our representative from Japan to tell us about the reception of the agreement in Japan.
Yep.
And,
First of all, thank you very much to have me here. I'm very honored to be Woodrow Wilson. The name of Woodrow Wilson is something for the professional diplomats, the genesis of the modern diplomacy in the 20th century. But about the TPP. Then talking about Japan, if you see if you go to the negotiation place in Hawaii, in Singapore, or Atlanta, you come across many journalists. If there are 200 journalists, I would say more than 100 are Japanese journalists. That tells something. And even before the government of Japan officially joined the negotiations, 2013 July, the media has been so much interested in TPP because they know that this is a big game changer for Japanese economy and Japanese foreign policy. So they're reporting a lot. So if you go to Tokyo or elsewhere in Japan, then take a cab and ask something about TPP. they know everything about TPP, I would say. If you ask, who do you know the USTR? They would know Mike Froman. But if you do the same thing in the United States, they don't know much about TPP. What TPP? What Froman? So that tells something about the Japanese interest in this TPP. I'm serious. Yeah. And so even before joining the negotiations, the people saw a lot of articles about the TPP. And even after the agreement, October 5th. So this is the sort of the situation where the Japanese people are paying attention to TPP. But as you may know that all the article is not necessarily accurate. Therefore, what we are doing now is try to explain the real content of TPP. And as you may know that all the leading companies and big companies are very much supportive of TPP. But when it comes to the, say, medium, small-sized companies or agricultural people, they have a little skeptical view on TPP because they only see the very sensational article about the TPP in Japan. So the government is trying to explain what's in it. So there is a very nice chapter for small and medium-sized economy. So now they get a sort of understanding of it. And also for service industries, after TPP, they would have a bigger business opportunities in Southeast Asian countries like our friends from Vietnam and Singapore and Malaysia. And so now more and more understanding is spreading in Japan. But at the same time, I would say, this is my personal comment of the negotiations, but you have experience of negotiation for your family, your organization, your office, or your city or county or maybe country. And everybody knows in negotiations, you have to make some kind of compromise. You cannot get everything you want. And I'm sure the audience here is very intellectual, so you may not listen to rock music, but there's one good band called Rolling Stones. And one song of Rolling Stones portrays the truth of life. That is, you cannot always get what you want. But if you make effort, you can get something you need. And I think the TPP is something like that. And the thing is, if you negotiate bilaterally on one issue, still you cannot get everything. But this is, remember, 12 countries and very comprehensive things, rules and market access. So it's very easy to point out, this is not good, this is not enough, this is not sufficient. But if you see this TPP in totality, more than 5,000 pages and covering all the related rules of the trade and investment, starting labor standard, environmental standard, intellectual property rights, state-owned enterprises, and you name it. And that is very ambitious, high standards. That is very good. But having said that, I see the reality. Not everybody like it in here or in elsewhere. So that it's very important for us to redouble our effort to explain the meaning and significance of TPP. And they say that the TPP is not just a trade and investment. The TPP has a very strong strategic and geopolitical connotation that is good for Asia Pacific. And finally, I have not been to the local sort of community in Japan because I'm stationed here. But instead, I'm going to local communities as much as I could. Last week, I went to Delaware. I went to some small gathering by chicken producers. The Senator Carper came, and I came, had a conversation. The conversation out there is very different from conversation here in Washington, D.C. They pay a lot of attention to the one specific interest, that is chicken. And if you see the chapter of market access on chicken, then you will see a great sort of a benefit out of it. So probably what we need to do is to explain the very specific profit or benefit for the certain industries. That is very important things for us to get the support from here and from my country.
Thank you, Minister Yamanuchi.
That's good.
Well, Ambassador Castillo, do you agree that this is a Rolling Stones agreement? You can't always get what you want, but you can get what you need. What are the people of Peru? How are they perceiving this agreement?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here at the Wilson Center. I'd like to thank also Cindy Arnson, a longstanding friend of Latin America. For us, it's exactly what you said. And actually, pondering a little bit about the comments of the ambassador of Canada and the minister of Japan, we've gone really in Peru a long way. 10 years ago, we negotiated our free trade agreement with the US, which was a major first free trade agreement. And it was a very, very difficult, tough discussion. And you could see it with a 90% opposition, both opinion poll and Congress. After 10 years of negotiating those agreements, and I was part of that in my former capacity in the finance ministry, the numbers have flipped. Now we have almost 80 to 90% approval of free trade agreements, and always a 10 or 20, opposition against those. And what explains this flip in the opinion is that we believe through free trade we've transformed our economy. The Peruvian economy is a very open one, is one that relies on high standards on different fields. And in particular, in this agreement, trying to have high standards has been a constant objective of different governments, because this began being negotiated during the previous government and will conclude in this one. So if I would to say the four main benefits, and then the issue that I think is at the core of the discussion here in the U.S., I would say first there's this new market access that we have. Out of the 12 countries, we already have free trade agreements with 6. We're adding 5 new markets. In particular, in sectors that are very labor intensive, where you don't only export commodities, but you export value added, which is something very good. The second is that in Latin America, perhaps the only country that has been able to achieve an insertion in value chains has been Mexico through NAFTA. Other countries really trade very little intra-regionally and intra-industry. So I think the part of the accumulation of rules of origin is very important for us, because it will enable our firms really to insert on value chains, which I think, in my view, it's one of the main advantages of this agreement. Third, although one has market access, but if you don't really work towards trade facilitation, lowering the barriers and sanitary and phytosanitary restrictions, you really don't have much, to reap benefits from. So the new procedures in place in the TPP will enable further trade and investment. And I think and I share the view of Japan, there's a strategic decision as a fourth element for Peru. We're now presiding APEC for the next year. We took over the Philippines. And one of the main, I think, things we have to do is to review this free trade agreement framework in APEC. And I think, although not all countries that have negotiated TPP are members of APEC, 12 are of the 21. But this will enable Peru, with its neighbors that are closer economies, to be able to look at the Pacific as a source of growth, employment, and opportunities. So now, what is the issue that has raised opinion, and it's actually one of the issues we understand is being debated here up the hill, which is IP, intellectual property rights, and biologics, which I think it's the main issue that has really affected us. And this is precisely to the point of you cannot really get what you want. In Peru, for instance, we didn't have any protection or any regulations for IP and biologics, because they didn't really exist when we negotiated the free trade agreement bilaterally 10 years ago. So our position was 0 years of market protection. And the US initial position was 12 years. So there was a huge and many countries in between. So the final outcome is one that our negotiators were able, to come up, which is 8 years of effective market protection, which is a combination of 5 years, of data protection, plus 3 additional years of regulations that need to come up so that we have that end result. And that's something that is being discussed and is not believed by many in Congress and in the industry here that isn't the case. So I would say that's something we've given up because that may increase the costs of access to pharmaceuticals and may have public health access issues in our country. But if one looks at the overall picture, this, given the benefits I've mentioned, is something that really pays off in our country. If I were to identify one of the main issues that explains Peru's progress in the past couple of decades, is trade and openness. So I would say the discussion will be there, but I think very different from 10 years ago, and it's because we've seen really benefits outweigh the costs.
Great, thank you. Just to add on, I appreciate your remarks, Ambassador Castilla, because you really got down into the nitty-gritty of some of the negotiating subjects. We're talking about data protection for biologic drugs, and just to distinguish those are gene therapy type drugs as opposed to small molecule pharmaceuticals. That's one of the new issues that we're grappling with in the TPP. You also mentioned accumulation of rules of origin, an important development that makes it easier to count the origin of a number of different countries into the finished product to make it easier to get the benefits that we're looking for in trade agreements out of complicated supply chains. So thanks for taking us down into the weeds a little bit. Ambassador Vinh, it is great to have Vietnam in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Some would say that Vietnam has had to do a particularly heavy lift to meet the standards of this agreement. How is it being received in Vietnam?
Thank you very much, and thank you, the Wilson Center, for the invitation. I think it's easier for me to speak after Ambassador of Peru. After Ambassador of Canada and Japan, certainly it will be difficult. So it's the nice thing that the TPP, as we perceive, to include both the developed and lesser developed countries like Vietnam. If you think in terms of both trade and strategic importance of the TPP, then you will see that it has been a good combination of countries in the TPP, but with a high determination to achieve and to ratify and then to implement in full the TPP. Vietnam is among one of those countries. And if you look back into the background of this one, Vietnam at first was very reluctant to make a decision to join the negotiations or not. And when we were invited, we have been discussing internally very much, and whether we should be in or whether we should step back and look. And actually, we've been kind of associate member or observer for some time. But we have been in real negotiations, and we have made our commitment to both the conclusion and the implementation of the TPP. Now we see, as what all of us agree, that the TPP has both trade and the strategic importance of this one. And maybe the people of Vietnam were very much optimistic. They have a lot of difficulties, but at the same time, the poll shows that about 80% of the Vietnamese people are in favor on the positive side of the TPP. And they look into the TPP, number one, as Ambassador Peru has mentioned, market access. They think that their goods will be have a greater market access to other countries. We have been facing a lot of technical barriers and high level of tariffs, for example. So this one will help us for market access. At the same time, there will be incentive to include or attract further investment, foreign investment, especially from the TPP country into the market of Vietnam. And number three, we have the same thing as Peru. A lot of companies in Vietnam, the business community in Vietnam, they want further reform along the market base. And this is very much a new thing for us when we conduct the surveys in the business, including also the small and medium size. They are in favor of the TPP because they want a level playing field even within the domestic market between the different sectors. And so I think there will be great chances for the private sector to further grow in Vietnam as well. But we have the same amount of challenges. And number one, we are a less developed countries competing in a high standard and strict rules environment. Then people are discussing back home, how can we compete in that environment? The access of market may be there available, but how can we utilize that opportunity provided by the TPP? That is the number one thing. Number two, they are caring about their own market, the domestic market, people, because a lot of foreign companies will be in Vietnam, and then they will compete, and we may fight back home even. But at the same time, we see a lot of incentive for renovation, for reform, for having a higher productivity in our business community and production, and this is the things that people are thinking. And the people of Vietnam, they want to export more to other countries, but at the same time, they love foreign goods. So we will see that it's both ways. So for us, when we get back home, most people welcome the conclusion of the TPP. But this time of the year is that people have been in more serious consideration when the TPP has become known to the business community and to the policy makers as well. And they have to discuss all this one. But I believe that the TPP will be implemented in full in Vietnam with great efforts on the part of the policy makers and also on the parts of the business community. Thank you.
That's a great point you made just a minute ago about the effective market access. That it's one thing to go into an agreement and negotiate a reduction in tariffs or on paper a reduction in non-tariff barriers, but there's a lot of work that has to be done in certification, licensing, inspection, domestic reforms, domestic knowledge, public education in order to effectively use the market access benefits that have been granted. So that was a particularly well-timed point. Let's talk, the Ambassador Vinh mentioned implementation challenges. Ambassador Dewar, can you talk a little bit about implementation challenges, maybe in Canada, but also from your perspective in other TPP countries? You've kind of been a student of the TPP over the last number of years that we've been negotiating it.
Well, I think a lot of the pundits over the years on TPP wrote a lot of stories about agriculture, but a lot of the negotiations that went on, not only here with TPP, and will possibly go on with the European proposed trade agreement with the United States, and went on with Canada, with Europe, is intellectual property. And the former finance minister, now ambassador from Peru, outlined the Rolling Stone on-ramp to this issue. There's a number of elements that are going to be debated here. And when I go to the Hill, a lot of the people on the Hill over the last couple of years have not only talked about TPP, but they've also talked about Canada's tentative agreement with Europe, because that's also a priority for the U.S. to negotiate that. And obviously biologics and all these other elements are very, very important. And I think it'll be part of a major part of the debate in all of the countries about the ratification of this. You've got the whole issue of the biologics. Canada's at 8 years, and 8 years with the European Union as well. A lot of the wording we think is in the TPP agreement is consistent with that. I'm not saying because it's a new government it's good or bad. I'm just saying those are the facts. You've got the whole debate on notice and takedown versus notice and notice, which is an interesting issue of enforcement in an enforcement agreement. You've got the issue of copyright, the 50 to 70 years. But if you look at Europe, they have opt-out provisions for families to look at that. Again, it's a factual issue. And so there's many elements. And as I said, in Canada, with notice and takedown versus notice and notice, the entertainment industry in the United States prefers the notice and takedown. The carrier industry, Cisco, Apple, you name it, whatever your device is, prefers the notice and notice provision. So we would go to negotiation sessions that have one part of California arguing one way and one part of California arguing the other, and I know that that debate will be on the Hill. In terms of enforcement, ratification, the new Minister of Trade, and these are her words in a debate at a Canadian American Business Council panel last week, and I couldn't possibly do them justice, but I'll just give it to you in rough terms. She was a former bureau head of Thomson Reuters in New York, so she put it in very clear language. She said, if you sign the document in the early new year, you're going out together. If you ratify it, you're getting married, and if you don't sign the document, you're broken up. So that's her language, and I'm going to use that here in this panel. What does it mean here in the United States? Well, obviously, the administration was part of the negotiations, had a mandate to negotiate an agreement, but the Hill has the authority to ratify any agreement that would be sent to them by the administration. And my read of that timing going to the Hill is it won't, I know people in the administration say it'll be early 2016. I don't believe it will be. I look at the primary schedule. Again, coming back to California, I think it's June, early June. Just I've looked at all the primaries. I'm sure all the other ambassadors have as well. So, you know, there's going to be the public interest debate that will take place, and I think it will. I think there will be an attempt to get a ratification in 2016, but I don't believe it'll be in the first quarter. I could be proven wrong, but that's my sense of it. In Canada, obviously, we have a new government that wasn't involved with every detail and didn't provide a mandate to the negotiators, and they're wise to take a look at the public interest in the document, and ultimately they have said not only will the public and stakeholders and provinces be important, but Parliament will have a stronger role in this trade agreement than other trade agreements, and that's their political commitment before the agreement was reached and after the agreement was reached. I think that's sensible. So, but I do see the United States to be intriguing on, you asked the question, on the enforcement. My nose tells me, it's not in any diplomatic notes, my nose tells me it will start, it'll be in the later second quarter, not in the first quarter.
Right, because there's two tracks. Get it through fast, get it through now before other political calculations get in the way, or do you tick all the boxes, do all the consultations, do everything you need to do in order to give the agreement legitimacy in the longer term? It's a challenge. Minister, what would you like to talk about in terms of implementation? Are you a betting man?
No. First lessons I've learned after I joined the foreign ministry many years ago. The diplomat has to be very honest. So I don't bet. But I try to observe. I try to meet as many people as possible. I meet all the pundits in this town and in elsewhere. And there is so much politicized argument here. But remember, we agreed on TPP, and the text was out. But we have not yet signed. This famous 90-day process is going on, right? Then after that, the 12 countries need to sign it. So in a sense, it's way too early to talk about the implementation of TPP itself, because before that, we have to do certain things. We have to sign, and each 12 countries have to ratify. That actually 6 countries and 87% of GDP would be the benchmark for the entering into the force. But anyway, and we are still in the process. And actually, the technical work is still going on to finalize the text language of the agreement. So this is the situation. And I really hope that this will take place as soon as possible, after 90 days. because everybody knows next year is election year. Not only presidential election, senator, and House of Representatives, and also governors. So all those politics would affect one way or the other for the argument and controversy over the TPP. So I really hope the things will move ahead. The talking about the implementation, and as I just mentioned that honesty is so important. During the negotiations, the Japan tried to be very honest. That means we will never make promise that things we know we cannot do. So every deal we cut means we are willing to do it. And we are sure as a government we have ability to fulfill it. That's the sort of the things. So for the implementation, through the ratification process in Japan, not only the text and this agreement, but also the domestic laws and regulation would be appropriately provided. Some of them are kind of revision of the existing laws, and some of them would be some new addition. But anyway, we try to be ready for both international agreement as TPP, but also the domestic laws and regulation to fulfill our obligation under TPP. That's what it is. But at the same time, the 12 countries agreed upon this very complicated and also comprehensive agreement. So probably we'll come across a certain situation where country A think, oh, I am fulfilling the obligation of TPP. But country B may say that, oh, no, you are sort of violating this agreement and this part. So this kind of situation may come across. So therefore, we need to work hard to make sure that this TPP will be appropriately implemented through all the communication channels and through all the meetings among the concerned countries. That's what we may need.
Great, thank you. And just to reiterate, what is necessary for the implementation of this agreement is that there must be 85 or 87? 85% of the GDP of the Trans-Pacific Partnership countries must be represented in an agreement all signed on before it can be implemented, which by necessity means that the United States must be in the
And Japan.
And Japan.
Okay. Don't you have a veto too? I don't know. Just asking the facts.
So rule number 1 is you must have 6, but rule number 2 is you must have
85%.
85%, and that's not possible to achieve without the U.S. and Japan. So there's some interesting dynamics there. Ambassador Castillo, we've talked about intellectual property as an implementation challenge. We've talked about some of the technical issues in an implementation challenge. We've also talked about some of the political timing and political barriers. What are you thinking in terms of implementation, both challenges and opportunities?
Well, we also have elections in my country. The thing is that all this debate has been centered about the elections in some countries, but we also have elections in other countries, and we're going elections next year. Mm-hmm. But having said that, for us, our trade negotiation has become more of a state policy, because we usually a government begins in a negotiation, and the other one gets ratified, and the third one implements it. Mm-hmm. So this is become actually common ever since we signed the free trade agreement with the U.S., with Canada, with Japan, with the European Union as a continuum. So I don't see that as an issue, although perhaps I suspect this is not being an issue being discussed in our current campaign, and it will most likely be seen by the next Congress and the next government in the second half of the year, most likely. But that's my guess, although that wouldn't be a source of concern. I think when we were one of the, given that we've been very, very busy negotiating and implementing all these agreements in the past, when we had the U.S. agreement signed, which was different from the Chilean one, for instance, a lot more higher standards in other fields. More than 100 new laws were approved by Congress. A lot of implementation, legal effort was done. So for us, on the margin, really, we've done a lot of the homework already. In IP, that's an area that we need to produce new regulations so we can meet the new standards that have been that have been agreed upon. And I would say in our case, and actually when you listen to discussions in Congress, they usually talk about developing economies, their troubles with complying with certain commitments in labor, environment. And I think the main challenge for us is to develop our own capabilities, the capacity building, the institutions, to be able to comply with the commitments we've signed upon. So as a comparison, before our trade agreement with the US, and now this is being ratified and even higher standards are put on labor, environment, we didn't have an environment ministry. We didn't have the appropriate means to make sure that our forests were properly taken care of. And all of this was built in the past 6 years. But we've been asked to have institutions similar to countries like the US that has already more than a century with such a framework in place. If one compares for instance, our Forest Service is 6 years old in comparison to the Forest Service in the US that is over 100 years old. So I think we need to really put all of our efforts in terms of strengthening our own institutions to be able to make sure that we comply with the high standards we've agreed upon. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, the main challenge that I see. It's not really coming up with new legal frameworks, but building these capacities. And I think this is a challenge perhaps shared by countries of lesser development than Japan, Canada, or the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really fine line, isn't it? That if you have an agreement with a high standard of ambition, that developing countries have an incentive to rise to the occasion and develop the institutions and compliance mechanisms. But if you push it too high, and if the ambition is too high, then it precludes effective participation of developing countries. Ambassador Vin, talk to me a little bit about implementation challenges.
Thank you very much. I also agree that this is a hard-won agreement, so we need to do first thing first. And first thing is signature and the signing and ratification process of this one. So everybody is looking to Japan and the US for ratification. And I think that we will have to do a lot for the approval by the parliament back home as well. But for us, each country needs to review the current system and framework in order to do the best things and set the TPP environment in place. And for us, we have to do more. The IP issue, the SOE issue, government purchase, and others, we will have to do a lot. So complying with the TPP is one aspect, but at the same time, we have the problem of proving to the people and the business community how much they will benefit from the TPP. And capacity building, I think, is a very good word for this one, that we need to assist the business and the people in order to see the benefits of that if they move forward further to get to the marks of the TPP. At the same time, next year we will have a change of leadership in our country as well. But as the Ambassador of Peru just mentioned, trade policy in our country is also a state policy, and we think that we will be seriously considering and approving this TPP. But certainly we have to do a lot back home. At the same time, apart from preparing yourself for the good implementation and complying with the compliance of the TPP, I think that people are looking from the perspective of Vietnam that conditions that are not in accordance with the TPP need to be carried off as well, and such as anti-dumping or other barriers. At this point in time, we think it should be out of the context of the relationship in trading between countries in the TPP. And another point is that it has not been adequately addressed during the negotiations of the TPP. For lesser developed countries, we need technical assistance in order to be able to fully implementing and complying with the TPP. And I think during our bilateral talks, a lot of other more developed countries have been very much eager to work with us, to help us in order to put in place an environment for good implementation of the TPP.
That's very interesting that there are opportunities for trade-related technical assistance. When I look at the economic modeling, looking at potential benefits for TPP members, those states that have been engaged in trade agreements for a long time, that are established industrialized economy, the benefits are relatively small, incremental. But when you look at the potential benefits for a Vietnam, for a Peru, they are much, much larger. But again, if you cannot access those benefits, if you can't make use of them, then they're just numbers on paper. We are in the era of mega regionals. You've talked about the Canada-EU Free Trade Agreement, the CETA. We may have also mentioned the TTIP. We don't talk much about the WTO anymore. The TPP seems to be leading the charge in these sort of mega regional agreements. What I'd like to know is that what do you think international trade looks like 20 years from now, and is TPP an important part of that vision? Ambassador Dewar.
Well, as a paid political announcement from Canada and Mexico, yesterday we were happy with the WTO decision. Having said that, it's taken a while.
So it's still got its uses.
It's taken a while. We didn't peak too early with it.
This is country of origin labeling.
Yeah,
for beef
that's
and
right.
pork. Yeah.
So, but one of the advantages of both from Canada's perspective, the agreements, even some of the trade agreements we have in this region itself are, I mean, the iPhone wasn't invented and distributed till, what, 2009? It was invented in 2007. I mean, things are moving very quickly in the world. And so some of the areas of trade that are contained or contemplated 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 50 years ago are not relevant to a lot of the opportunities and liabilities in trade today. So you got everything in the world, everybody in the world, and every institution in the world has got to continue to keep moving and not stand still on the governance. And key to that is rule of law and reciprocity. And sometimes that exists in existing trade agreements, sometimes ones that are even talked about with great admiration don't necessarily have complete reciprocity in certain elements. So my view is the agreements, everything in life has to be modernized as you move along. If the institutions don't remain their relevancy, then you've got to make them relevant.
Thanks, Ambassador. Now, we don't have a Rolling Stones analogy for you.
Start me up.
Okay. But we do have a hockey analogy. We can't have Canadians at the table without talking about hockey. And that is, you got to see where the puck is going, not where the puck has been. Minister Yamanuchi,
if I may,
Japan see where the puck is going?
I mean, the international trade has improved all the way, starting from the Kennedy round, very famous one, and the Tokyo round, and Uruguay round. And through those process, the international community has associated the improvement of the international trade, more freer trade, fair trade. And it has been proved that it's good for the international community. And I would say, I quoted Rolling Stones that time, so I would quote the Beatles.
All right.
And if you are a fan of the Beatles, there's a very, very famous album of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. In that album, there's a song called "It's Getting Better All the Time." So I would say trade, international trade, has been improving. It's getting all the time up to today. And I would say TPP would set a very high bar. But this TPP is not the end of the story here. So already, the 3 additional ASEAN countries showed its interest: the Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand. And we know that Taiwan is very much interested. And I'm sure that many other countries are potentially interested in this one. And remember, when Prime Minister Abe came to town last April, and he met with President Obama, 2 of them mentioned TPP as the biggest free trade agreement ever negotiated. The most high standard trade agreement ever negotiated. This is what TPP is all about. And the additional country is trying to join the TPP. So I would say TPP would set the higher standard for international trade. And Laura, you just mentioned the negotiations with the European communities, with Canada. Japan is also negotiating, and TTIP also. So if we include European countries, close to 70% of GDP would be covered by this high standard. So I'm not, I don't make any prophecy, but 20 years from now, I would say that the higher standard would be prevailing in the world. I hope.
Excellent, excellent. I thought you were going to give me the other, I get by with little help from my friends, which would also be appropriate.
I'll take that one. I'll take this side of the table. We'll take it.
We got the amigos over here. Just before I turn to Ambassador Castillo for his views, I just want to remind you we're going to take questions in just a few minutes. And those who would like to send questions through the Wilson Center, please do use mention tweet at the Wilson Center. I've been trying to follow along hashtag TPP, and I'm getting a lot of stuff in Japanese, which I do not read. So if you have a question, please at the Wilson Center, hashtag TPP, and I will see it better. Ambassador Castillo, what does the global trading world look like in 20 years? And how is TPP a part?
No, I think both our friends from Canada and Japan have already outlined, and I coincide completely with them. And actually, let me talk about the dynamics that are happening in Latin America, because you have in Latin America, countries are very open. They are participating in trade agreements, looking towards the Pacific, and you have countries that have pursued different schemes, and that seems to there is some light that may be changing. So actually, and why that may be changing is because the economic performance is very different. Countries are more open, tend to do better, creating jobs and having better quality jobs, higher standards, et cetera, in comparison to others that remain closed. So I think we're going to perhaps see a positive contagion effect in our region towards having more countries in Latin America try to see how they can fit either the TTIP or the TPP eventually. We have agreements already with both, with everyone. So Peru and Chile, for instance, and Mexico already have agreements with Europeans and with Asians and with North Americans. So I see this convergence actually, the real politics is taking over with these large agreements, TPP, TTIP, going forward in a certain way, having other countries look at this process. A lot of leadership is being, and political capital is being spent in many countries to have this realized. So I think we're going to have a convergence of trade rules towards what TPP, TTIP are already establishing, and I see that in the future. I remember, being very frustrated when I was a negotiator in Hong Kong in a round of WTO, and we were 6 hours surrounded by South Korean, rice producers that didn't agree upon something, and it was a very polarizing and really stalemate situation at the time, and this was 10 years ago, and I think overall things are changing. Overall, we're seeing the benefits of having clear rules of engagement and trade and investment. They pay off, and therefore countries which are pragmatic at the end of the day are trying to converge towards those standards. So I see TTIP, TPP, converging and them becoming the rules of the game for trade and investment.
I think you raise an important distinction in that we think of this as a trade with Asia agreement, but it is very much about trade within the Americas and the Americas' competitiveness vis-a-vis the world. So who have we got? We've got United States, Canada, Mexico, Chile, Peru. That's the full TPP Americas. Did I miss anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that there is, I think you said contagion effect of TPP. Is it your sense that it's more of a convergence towards more liberalized trade, or are you seeing a schism between those who trade and those who close?
I think there is, if one looks at the declarations of the new Argentinian president, for instance, who's going to take office in a couple of days, his first statement has been to be having closer ties with Pacific Alliance countries, which are actually the ones in TPP,
Right.
and the need to really open up more the economy, to be more competitive. So, and this is one example, and the same can be said about Brazil as well. So these are dynamics that are taking place right now, and actually, I think the interesting thing and a way to be able to cope with the new world situation with low commodity prices, with normalization and financial conditions, is looking at trade, intra-regional trade, as a way to be able to shield us and be more strong towards dealing with the adverse economic situation we're going to face.
Yeah.
And you can do this through trade, intra-regional trade, value chains, this thing that I think TPP will provide.
Great. Ambassador Vinh, take us forward 20 years. What does the global trading system look like? What is Vietnam's role in the global trading system? Are you convinced that mega regionals are the way to go?
I concur with the comments and observation by Japan and Peru that the general trend for decades now that trade liberalization will be made easier together with high standards, and at the same time, if you can combine TPP and the US and Europe countries, then that will be very much incentive and also very much of a force towards a trend for globalization of the model of the TPP. But I want to focus more on how it works in Asia. Asia, kind of this trade facilitation arrangement is new. This high standard and well-organized way of trade facilitation is very much new in Asia. We have a lot of other efforts like the ASEAN economic community building, our ASEAN trade relations with China, Japan, Korea, and others in the region. It is in a looser manner. And so I think it will give incentive for the arrangement for trade liberalization in Asia and Pacific. And it serves as a motivation for other countries to try both arrangements. Two sets of arrangements will continue to be there in place for some time. And they have both competitive advantages and disadvantages. So I think it will have countries in the region to enhance trade with each other, but at the same time moving towards a higher standards. The TPP will have an impact as such in Asia, and together with its impact on a global scale. But at the same time, we see that the TPP need to prove itself as a success. So come back to implementation. I think this is very much important to prove itself as a success, not only for developed countries, but also for the lesser developed countries, and how developed countries and lesser developed countries can work together. That will be a great motivation for countries in Asia, because they have different, like Ambassador Peru just mentioned, economic and trade performances. So I think it will be very much a model, but it needs to prove itself.
Right.
Why different arrangements will be complementary with the TPP.
Right, right. And well, regional trade institutions are nothing new. You mentioned a number of them. Regional institutions that actually work are relatively novel, and that having too many regional institutions can actually create barriers unless we're moving towards some sort of convergence model. All right, we have come to the point where I would like to invite your questions and brief comments with question marks at the end. I think we'll go around and we'll take 2 or 3 questions, and then my panelists can address any and all that they wish to. Sorry, those 3 people, hands up again so I can see them. All right, I'm going to start at the front and I'll move to the back. Yellow shirt, guy with the tie, green sweater, please, and the lady with the blue jacket at the back. Can we remember that?
Thank you very much. My name is Zhang Yue. I work for China Daily. I have 2 questions. First is for Peru. You mentioned about the IPR issues on joining the TPP. Can you elaborate a little bit what kind of changes will be made on the IPR protection issues in joining, in complying with the TPP regulations, and whether such kind of changes will be suitable for the current economic development pattern for Peru? The second question is basically about China. I was looking forward to hear from all of you about whether you are looking forward for China to join the TPP, and what kind of impact you are looking forward to if not, China will be joining. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a question on the table about IP Vietnam and China and TPP. Let's move to the gentleman with the checked shirt, please.
Thank you. I'm Ryan Rainey. I'm a reporter from Inside U.S. Trade.
Hey, our favorite publication.
Oh, thank you. To start off, I just wanted to see if the Obama administration is reaching out to any of your countries in seeking more options to address some of the issues that members of Congress have raised. Some of you mentioned biologics, but there are a number of other issues as well. And what specifically they have raised, or what you would be willing to accept as tools to address those issues. And secondly, for Ambassador Ving, you mentioned that anti-dumping law is an issue for Vietnam. I just wanted to clarify your comments. You seem to be implying that Vietnam views receiving market economy status in U.S. trade remedy cases as a precondition for ratification of TPP on Vietnam's part. I wanted to see if that's what you're saying and if that's Vietnam's position. Thank you.
Never easy questions from Inside U.S. Trade. Gentleman in the green sweater, and then the lady in the blue, and then my friends can figure out how to answer these.
Hi, yeah, I'm Ethan Goffman from Sustainability, Science, Practice, and Policy. So I wanted to ask about environmental standards because there's a Sierra Club report that criticizes the TPP and says there will be tribunals of 3 lawyers that will make decisions, and corporations can sue countries that have new environmental standards that might hurt the businesses, and therefore they might have to pay large fines. It's a closed tribunal, no appeal, might not have too many environmentalists on board the tribunal, and it might freeze. The countries might not want to press environmental laws simply due to fear of the suit and the penalty. And also it's interesting, this is taking place at the same time as the climate accords, and I'm wondering if it would be possible for countries to be taking measures to meet their targets for climate change, that they could possibly be sued by these tribunals, because this would be hurting companies' existing plans and economic interests.
Okay, so we have a question on the floor about investor-state dispute settlement, the TPP, and impact on the environment. Last question goes to the lady in the blue, who has her own microphone, so maybe we can collect.
I'm Yoyo from Hong Kong Phoenix TV. I have a similar question to the first one. What do you think about the trade relations with China will be after TPP signing?
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, should we start from the left this time, because our friend from Vietnam has had a large number of questions, or should we give him time to think and we'll start back at the right? What do you think, Ambassador Vinh? It's up to you.
I'm up to you. You are the moderator.
You go ahead and answer anything that you feel that you would like to answer.
Yeah, I tried some of the issues here. First on the question related to Vietnam, I must tell you that there will be no preconditions for ratification of the TPP. We have commitments under the TPP. We will be trying our best to ratify and to implement it. Now, on the market economic status recognition, actually Vietnam has been recognized as market economic status by nearly 40 countries, including some of the countries in the TPP. And we are now working with the US in order to do that. We have been advised that it will be on a parallel track or the other track. And so we try to do it. So this is a mutual recognition of both countries, and we will be in close touch with our American colleagues in working on this one. It has not, I think, it's not linked to the TPP, but we had hoped that if we meet the standard of the TPP, then the process of negotiations on market status, market economy status recognition will be easier. That's one thing. But at the same time, in our trade, if we meet all the things and conditions outside the framework of the TPP should not be put on the normal trade relations between countries in the TPP. And that's what we expect from. Now, regarding for countries to be in the TPP, other than those are already in, I think the countries in the TPP has been discussing this issue. First, we need to strengthen the TPP process. We have been we have concluded the TPP. We have not signed it, and we have not ratified it. So the first things first is that we need to sign it, to ratify it, implement it. But countries in the TPP have also discussed the possibility of including other countries in the TPP. So I think it depends on other countries' voluntariness and the readiness of other countries to meet the criteria of the TPP. Then it has been made very clear that the TPP is inclusive. And I think that for issues like property rights or environment protection, it has been a good provision in our point of view, and included in the high standards and rules of the TPP. We try to do that. I'm not quite sure of how dispute management will be carried on. Maybe our colleagues from Japan will know more on that. But I think generally it will be very much good. Now, on the possibility of the U.S. administration reaching out to other countries in talking about those issues and queries raised by members of Congress, I think it's natural for every administration to learn the queries from not only the Congress, but also the population and the business community to raise issues with other countries. But at the same time, we have to know that the TPP is a hard-won one, and we need to strengthen it by making efforts to ratify it first. And this is what we think. We have not, we have no information of how and already there has been any kind of contacts between the U.S. and other countries for now. Thank you.
Okay, Ambassador Castillo, we've got a number of questions you can take a stab at, or you can answer something that we didn't ask.
Oh.
Something we should have asked.
Okay, very quickly, because I think we're running out of time. We do have to put together an IP, new regulations that didn't exist, as I mentioned. And this is something that needs to be done, and will be done, you know, to meet the 8-year market effective protection agreement we agree upon, and that's the source of a little bit of a doubts of in certain committees up the hill. So I think this is something that needs to be clear. That is the agreement, and we need to put the regulations so that we meet those compromises. China is critical. China is we have a free trade agreement with China. Perhaps if one were to compare the sort of provisions that we have with the Canadians or with the Japanese in comparison to the China agreement, they're not precisely homogeneous. But I think this is an opportunity to really upgrade our China free trade agreement. And China for Latin American countries is a critical investment and trading partner. So having China join eventually the TPP would be something that for my country would make absolute sense. In terms of outreach of the U.S. government, one thing is when we were negotiating the deal, we were negotiating the deal. Once the deal is agreed upon, we're all on the same side. And we regard that there's no room, and we agree with Ambassador Froman that there's no room for renegotiation. It was very tough, very complicated. 6 years, over 5 years of negotiations to get where we are. So, and we all have to deal with our own constituencies, our own our own congresses, our own parliaments, and public opinions. So that's something that we're very clear about. That was a very tough, deal to agree upon. But once we agree, that's it, in our view, because otherwise it opens, a whole series of Pandora boxes and be very difficult. And in terms of the investor-state dispute and the environmental concerns, I think one thing that most countries try to be are consistent with their policies. So now in Paris, many countries are negotiating their commitments so to agree upon the targets to avoid the 2% or reach the 2% or even lower target in terms of emissions of carbon fuels. So we need to be absolutely consistent with our trade policy. It doesn't make any sense to be the trade policy, environmental policy, a disconnection. And we try to be consistent with that. Now, I find, and perhaps Peru is an exception to the rule, is that we've actually benefited from having clear investor-state resolution mechanism in place, in which most of the cases, surprise, the country has won the case against the private firm. So demonizing these schemes really doesn't really help much. At least that's been our experience. Most cases, going through these processes have given us a positive result. So actually, I wouldn't say that, but we need to be absolutely consistent with the sanctioning and with the compliance, as I mentioned before, on the environment and on labor, and be consistent with our climate change position and our trade position, and that can be done. And the agreement has been, I think, tailored so that that is, we can have that consistency among our policies.
Good, thank you. Sir, would you like to take on any of the questions, all of the questions?
I'm
Mr.
glad that
Yamaguchi?
no one asked me specific questions, but
That's because we're reading it all on Twitter.
if I may, two elements. One is compared with the existing free trade agreement or WTO rules, the TPP rules have been so much enhanced. Think of this way: there's no provisions for digital economy, digital trade. There's no provisions on environment or labor standard or state-owned enterprises. So much so that this TPP is a much improved form of free trade agreement. Some gentleman mentioned the environment, but no other free trade agreement ever mentioned about environmental issues, but TPP is. So that tells a certain improvement for this. And second element I would like to add is some ladies questioned about the China. And no matter which country it may be, or no matter which area it may be, the TPP provides the Chapter 30, such a sort of a provision of the addition to TPP. That is, I think there are basically two sort of factors. One is everybody every member have to agree upon the addition. That is one thing. The second thing is the new member have to be sure that they have to have commitment to meet with high standard of every rules and have to negotiate with all the market access with existing members. Basically, these two criteria, which apply to any country. That is the sort of the thing.
Right.
And finally, I just mentioned there one more sort of quote of the pop music. And I think this TPP will be the bridge over troubled water, which lead us to the better place.
That is wonderful. Bridge over troubled water, which is a point we almost make in our publication here at the Wilson Center, in which we echo what you just said. The new issues take time when you introduce them into the trading system. They do not appear perfect. They take a long time to work out and to develop and to get the appropriate level of discipline and opportunity. So thank you for that. Ambassador Doer, I think the last word is yours. You can answer a question or make
Well, I
something
think
up.
we're running overtime, so people will be singing Leonard Cohen's song from Canada, Hallelujah, when I'm finished.
It's closing time.
The closing time's even better. Suzanne goes down to the river. I like that one too. The three things. I'm not aware Japan or China has applied to get in. Canada had to apply to get in because we weren't one of the initial charter members, and so I'm not aware that they have asked to get in. Number two, the administration here in Washington has claimed, including the President, the Secretary of State, and the Ambassador of Trade, that the environmental conditions are improved over the existing trade agreements the United States has. So the question, I would never disagree with the administration on that point. And number three, the trade agreement, once it's reached, is not a buffet.
It's a hoagie.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you so much. First, thank you to my program directors and colleagues here at the Wilson Center, who it was a group effort putting this program on today. Thank you to all of you who are attending in person, and to those of you who are watching us over webcast. We appreciate your time today. And most importantly, thank you to you, ambassadors, ministers, for taking the time to help us understand this agreement better, and for your work up to this point in bringing this agreement to fruition. Thank you.